Hey, everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Pastor Megan in San Francisco at Grace Evangelical Lutheran Church in the Sunset, where we worship every Sunday at 10:30 in the morning. And yeah, don't come to church when you're sick. That's my advice for this cold and flu season. How
Hi,
about Pastor Amanda?
hi there. I'm Pastor Amanda. I serve at Central Lutheran Church in Portland, Oregon, and our worship services on Sunday are at 10:15 in the morning, and we have adult education at 9. There's lots of stuff going on for young families right now, so be sure to check out centralportland.org. You could even go slash young families and find it, but just go to centralportland.org and get lots of information. We're going skating on Saturday, so you can join us at Oaks Park at 10:30 in the morning to go roller skating. I am super duper thrilled and super excited. So
Are you going to
come
secretly
join
teach
us.
them roller derby?
I'm not gonna secretly teach them roller derby, but I am gonna put some soft stuff around my safety gear because the last time I took a little one around the rink, I gave them Velcro burn on their wrist
Oh,
because I wear my safety gear all the time, particularly when there are little ones that could fall over in front of me. So I'm gonna figure out how to cover my Velcro with some flannel or something so I don't give the littles burn as they're hanging off of me at the park at the rink this weekend. So over to John.
I'm John Longworth. I'm the pastor at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Rutland, Vermont, and also the Little Lamb School. You can find us on Saturday nights at 5:30 or Sunday mornings at 9:30 in the morning. Though if you come this weekend, you won't find me at all because I'm actually going to be preaching at 10 o'clock in the morning at confirmation camp at Camp Calumet in Freedom, New Hampshire. So looking forward to taking some texts and seeing what we can do for 200 confirmation students and their adult advisors.
that sounds like so much fun in the slushy, yucky, not snow anymore. Which is actually what the inside of my brain feels like right now with the muck that's in there. So I'll try not to cough on everybody. Thank goodness there's a screen between us. You can't catch my germs. Um, so the texts today are super fun. It's what I like to call Snake Sunday. It's the Sunday where we talk about um, how when Moses was in the desert, the sandal-wearing people were afraid of poisonous snakes. Why didn't they just wear different shoes? We don't know. But they were afraid of the poisonous snakes, and Moses became very cool when he got to walk through the desert with one of the snakes on a pole that was dead. It was also one of the prominent gods of some of the other people that were in the surrounding area, so it helps that you're kind of showing that you have conquered this fancy god that's in the neighborhood. Um, yeah. So I thought to distract you for a second, I would show you this cross that I got in Machu Picchu in Peru. It comes from the Incan idea of the snake being a fantastic thing. That's the complete opposite of what the people in poisonous snake biting their toes land thought of snakes. Also, the Mayans and the Aztecs, most of the South American and Mexico faiths have snakes being important and being godlike and teaching us things about the way that the world works, whether it's time and about the frailty of humanity, or if it's about the way that um, this secretive animal with no feet can be powerful. There is some lovely things going on with snake imagery if you go below the United States border. So just know that not everybody hates snakes. This idea of snakes goes back to the Garden of Eden, the idea that the snake is the one that tempts people or tricks people or is the sign of sin, and a lot of imagery with Mary, the mother of Jesus, you'll see her stepping on a snake, this idea that she was born into the world without any sin so that she could bear a child that would have no sin, and that she was the first person to be sinless in the world. That is an ideology that still remains in the Catholic Church and in the southern parts of the Americas, where Mary has almost a higher status than Jesus does. Um, I was listening to an interesting description of the story of the Garden of Eden from Professor Steve Davidson from PLTS, who talks about the Garden of Eden being a time when God declares that if the people in the garden eat the fruit, they will be executed. The Hebrew is executed. And the snake is right when the snake says, "You're not going to be executed," because that's not what happens in the story. And so Professor Davidson talks about this story being one of the first acts of grace that is seen in the Old Testament, even though we mostly experience the Old Testament as a bloody, bloody, do what I say or you're going to die kind of book. But that if you pay attention to some of these stories where God gives people a lesser punishment than they deserve, or God declares is the rightful punishment of whatever their behaviors is, then you can find little moments of grace in there. And so it's possible that throughout Christian history the snake has gotten a bum rap. If the snake is this truth teller who was right all along. But in imagery and painting, and especially like Renaissance painting, you're going to find snakes being a yucky thing that I think in part lives out today because of shows like Fear Factor, where we are still indeed, many of us, afraid of snakes. So if you take the thing that we're afraid of, you say that God is more important and more powerful than it, then that works pretty well for most of most people's faith lives, to have a pretty simplistic answer that God is a protector, and you'll understand that because snakes are the reason. So that's kind of my opening idea about this Numbers text. John, do you have any thoughts that you want to share about it?
Really, I mean, just from an image perspective, the thing that I always think of when I read this text, have you ever seen videos of a snake ball? In certain desertous places, snakes will actually nest together underground, and if you step on it or step near it or make too much noise, the vibrations in the ground will wake them all up. And so literally it's like the ground explodes and out fly snakes. Which, I mean, if you weren't expecting that, would be just about the most horrible thing that could happen. So I've often wondered if the experience of the people, you know, they're loud and whiny and grumpy and complaining anyway, and if they just happen to do that complaining when they were camped on top of a snake ball, and that's what, you know, I mean, because if all of a sudden a big hole opens up in the ground and out pour snakes, it could feel like, you know, you're under attack, or that, you know, you've really stirred up something rather awful. So that's I mean, that's a nature show image that I've connected with this story, at least in my own mind.
It also reminds me of the stories that people tell to scare you when you're in an outhouse, of the things that might come out of the toilet. And it's very scary. Snake balls, that's horrible.
I had a very different take on this when I preached on it once before, where I talk about what I find somewhat beautiful in this text is that it's really easy, like when you're hurting or not well, to hide in your tent or to stay in your tent. So if a snake has bitten you and it's happened in your tent, to just stay in your tent and not let anybody know that something's going on, and to stay kind of hiding from it. But if you do that, then you're probably going to die from the poison. So the scripture tells us that the people were told to come out of their tents and to look at the snake, to look at the snake on the staff that Moses is carrying, and that in doing that they would be healed. And so I think that there's something, you know, when we get into the John text, we start talking some about the light and the darkness, and not allowing darkness to overtake us, and those kinds of pieces. And I think that there's something there to be said, that what provides healing in this situation is that which has caused the pain. So if you stay in your tent and hide from it, if you ignore it, if you turn your back on it, if you run the opposite direction from it, all of those things, you're not going to find the healing. But if you come out of your tent and you look upon that which has caused you pain, and if you look upon that which has harmed you and is making you sick, that's when healing comes. So I think that there's beautiful metaphor there. As
long as it's a metaphor and not science, though, right?
Right, it's a metaphor. It's not science. How much in our scripture is actually science? So
Oh,
when
so much.
so
It's all
so when we
science.
it's all science. When we look at this as a metaphor, and we see that there's this story of people wrestling with something that is causing them great pain and is harming them and hurting them, and that is what they are confronting when they are looking at this with Moses, and they find healing through that. There is encouragement for those who are on recovery journeys, for those who are on healing journeys, maybe not looking for a cure but looking for healing. Those kinds of pieces, I think there's something really beautiful there. So that's my 2 cents about this particular passage.
Now can we talk about snake handling?
We talked
Because,
about snake balls. Why not talk about snake
well,
handling? I love the snake ball imagery. I mean, it's really terrifying, but it's
because I
cool.
think this is one of the texts that people hear about and then they wonder if visions or videos that they've seen of people handling snakes is kind of the where all Christians live, that we kind of ignore things that are bad for us and jump into the middle of them for the purpose of proving that God is on our side. And I think that's the opposite of what this text is about. I think this text is about comforting you when there's this inevitable scary thing that is happening to you and hurting you. And even if it's giving you something to focus on and that makes the pain go away because you're focused on something, that scientifically is something that we know can happen. If you can meditate and concentrate on one object, that your pain can decrease, but it's not going to take the poison out of your body. And I do have experience with mysterious healings that are beyond the bounds of medical science, but I don't think that just because God is able to do something, you should jump in with both middle fingers up and be like, well, then save me from this. And this is not to disparage people who have grown up with a tradition of snake handling or who have learned how to befriend snakes or live in community with snakes or any of the culturally appropriate things that might work. Let's just say it's not a Lutheran thing I learned in South Dakota, handling snakes. That doesn't mean there aren't snake handlers in South Dakota. In fact, there are, and there are people who get hurt doing that all of the time. And there are also people who could choose for similar reasons not to take vaccinations because God can protect you, or not to use medical science because God's protection is good enough and prayer is good enough that you don't need to add extra things to it. And I think I just want to say snake handling is not the dumbest thing anyone's done for faith. It's just not the dumbest thing. It's not the dumbest thing I've done for my faith, right? Like, if you think about the whole course of my life and things that I've believed, rules I've thought you had to follow, or books that I read that I thought were the greatest new thing in time, if telling someone to handle snakes would not be the dumbest thing I've ever said from a pulpit or in a blog or anything like that. I just think we all learn and we grow and we understand what God is up to. Having said that, I think that God wants what is best for us and wants us to use our knowledge and skills in the ways that are best for us and best for the health of people. And this was a way, this was people wandering in the wilderness to escape slavery, and being around poisonous snakes was certainly, no one will ever argue that it would be better to be a slave and building the pyramid as the Israelites imagined themselves to be doing, than to walk through poisonous snake to get out of that journey. And so there are things that we do to escape injustice and to escape violence that isn't necessarily God's hope for us and how we will live forever. The things that we do to rid ourselves of a domestic violence situation are not the ways we live every single day. The ways that we survive life in prison is not the way that we live every day of our life. And so I think just remembering that Lutherans and most mainline denomination Christians err on the side of doing the things that are healthful and bringing health to the world, and helping us escape injustice. And so unless you're going to win a lot of money on Fear Factor and you've weighed the risks and it feels okay to you, I don't know that God is necessarily still calling people to handle snakes and to get bit by them. So that's just my little 2 cents about people being safe. Anybody else want to take that on?
I agree with you. I mean, I think that sometimes, particularly in the United States, we take some of these texts where it's, let yourself be a witness for God in your trials and tribulations, and we take them to a bit of an extreme. That being said, we have free will, and people choose to worship as they choose to worship and choose to experience God in multiple ways, in a multitude of ways, and we support that. And I agree with Pastor Megan that this is not a situation of um, going from safety to safety. This is a situation of fleeing slavery into a war zone. So we're not talking about a suburban middle class life that these folks are living. So yeah.
And it could be a time when we can talk about harm reduction as a church, that if the clear path in front of you isn't a clear path of safety, that trying to choose the safest option is what God longs for us, even if it's not the safest option we'll ever choose in our whole lives. If you don't understand this kind of thinking, a really good one is Kate Bornstein's book, 101 Alternatives to Suicide for Freaks and Geeks and other things. That's not the exact title. I'll put a link down here. But to think about the different ways that we experience harm, harm to our heart, harm to our psychology, harm to our physical body, and to try to choose the least harm option across the board when it's possible. And so I would just put that out there for people. It's why you might find pastors able to hand out clean needles during times when politicians aren't able to hand out clean needles, because we want people to have a healthier option, even if it's not the 100% best option, to give people a road towards wholeness. And I think that's what Jesus is about, is the path towards wholeness, not saying, why aren't you at the goal? Why aren't you perfect? Why aren't you awesome? That we have this God who longs to keep shepherding us back onto the path towards wholeness. So you might find Christians and Lutherans and Episcopalians in different spaces of where they are on the spectrum of the kind of healthfulness that they encourage in the world. And so, some people might be able to provide needle exchange. Some people might be against needle exchange because they're helping people go cold turkey who have the skills and the ability to do that. And other people might be in a different spectrum of trying to encourage abstinence for those who have that ability. And so you'll find people in different parts of the path, and hopefully we're all working together towards safety. This is my pretend Bible thumping. The psalm, I think, has that same idea in mind, that people are led towards healing and that we are taken away from destruction. I love the bits about how the ancient people hate all their food and they get so bored with life. It reminds me of if teenagers wrote the Bible, most of it would be about stuff that bores them.
John, are you going to be touching on any of that kind of stuff with your confirmands?
I'm to be perfectly honest, I'm still not sure yet. But the power of boredom is really interesting. There was reading an article recently, a psychology article, saying that all of the gadgets that have come to fill up our pockets and our space and our times are actually preventing us from being bored, and that because we're not being bored, we're actually becoming less creative, less intelligent, and less spiritual. Because there's always something that's blinking or binging or chiming to distract us. And in a lot of ways, we actually, even though it sounds counterintuitive, we actually move forward as a species and as people when we get bored.
Me too.
Well, I think
It's
that
true.
makes sense. I mean, when you're a kid, a young child, and you're bored, what do? You start playing with your imagination. And I think it was years ago when I was walking alongside a 3-year-old who had gotten bored. I had hurt my back that day, and so I was like laying on my back with my feet up on the couch and kind of trying to play with him, and he was bored out of his gourd. So what did he do? He played with his imagination, and suddenly, he was the doctor, and he was the cab driver, and he and just flitted from idea to idea to idea. If I had had a tablet to just hand him at the time, he would have just been clicking the colors and playing with the pretty buttons, and he would never have been the cab driver who picked me up and took me to the hospital, and the doctor who decided that I needed the medicine, and the nurse who decided that they were going to give me the injection, and the dog who came up to lick my face and make it better, right? I mean, you can try on all those pieces in your imagination in about 5 minutes when you're 3.
Mhm.
um, so to lose that, I had forgotten just how beautiful and powerful that gift is of filling your time with your imagination. And and I agree. We are so attached to our little devices that tell us everything that we do miss out on that. Boredom
And
is pretty powerful.
I think my ADHD makes me a better and or different kind of pastor in that I get bored all the time. It's probably one of the most often heard phrases in our house is that I'm bored, um, and that means that I get a lot of stuff done. I don't understand what pastors do all day long. I have no idea. It helps probably that I don't write sermons, that I just preach sermons. But then I'm like, I'm going to go repaint the whole church this week. Or I'm going to make a garden in the front yard. And I often have pastors being like, how do you get all this stuff done? And it's because I'm bored and I have ADHD and I can juggle all the plates and spin them all at the same time and pay attention to them when one's getting wobbly and try to get stuff done. And so thank God that I get bored a lot because it sure makes me productive. Just
And
saying.
for those of us who don't have ADHD and try to keep up, no, but it's true. I think the people I know who are the most bored are oftentimes the most creative. And we need folks who are creatives, and we need folks who are bean counters. There's a really great book. Um, Megan, write this one down so I can put it down here. Called Me, Myself, and Bob by Phil Vischer. It's a book by the creator of VeggieTales, who that talks about creating VeggieTales and then losing them, and kind of the restart and coming up and creating something new. And he talks about wanting to very much to create a Disney-like empire, only with a Christian positive focus instead of just consumerism of Disney. And he was so focused on Walt most of the time and Walt's creativity. But in his book, he makes it clear the point that you have to have it's the Disney brothers that actually make it work. It's not just Walt, it's his bean counting brother. And his bean counting brother is the one who makes sure that the business and everything still runs. So God oftentimes pairs together those who get bored and bounce around and do 5 million awesome things and creativity type stuff, and bean counters who help us to make sure that budgets are met and we carry all the way through to the end of our task. And then there are those of us who are somewhere in the middle who kind of try to do both of them halfway. And God gives some
Oh,
people the ability to do all of them all the way. But I'm just laying out there that if you find yourself really, really creative, but you have a hard time finishing a task or something all the way through to the end, that oftentimes God will provide you with a partner, if you're watching for that, of someone who may not be able to come up with those ideas, but can make a vision become reality really effectively.
and build
So
stuff with hammers and nails.
build stuff with hammers and nails and make sure that you have the people to pay and are even able to pay them.
Ooh.
Fancy schmancy.
Are we trying to avoid this Ephesian text because it talks about passions of our flesh? No.
I
Okay.
didn't go to text study. I
Ephesians.
haven't actually read the Ephesians text yet. So tell me about the Ephesians text this week.
The Ephesians text is a classic, possibly written by Paul text, that likes to believe that there's a separation between what we think in our brain, or back then, I don't know that they located it in their brain, and what we feel, and back then they thought that was in our tummy, and how we love in the world. So I don't know if anybody else on our little panel right now is going to get this, but if you guys watched The Bachelor, it very much came down to this kind of separation. So Bachelor Chris is struggling between two girls, and they always make it seem like at the last minute he decides who he's going to love for the rest of his life. But he has this classic divide. The person who is a draw to him for whatever mysterious reason, in part because they maybe don't like him as much, and it seems like if they do like him and learn to love him, that it will be real because it doesn't come as quickly as everyone else in the show. And really feeling like you have a spark with someone. And then on the other hand, the person who's all in for you, who's a great idea because they're going to move to your silly farm in the middle of Iowa, and can fall head over heels within a 2-month time span on a television show, and you know for sure is going to say yes when you propose. So there's this split sometimes in love between the kind of like crazy raw feelings and the people who are going to be stable and care for us. And I don't know, in television shows it always seems that person is less attractive than the amazing person. That's, I don't think, always the case in life. But this idea that you are trying to figure out what you're going to choose. Are you going to choose the people that you have this crazy spark with, even if it goes in other parts of your life? Are you going to choose the person that is a good pastor's spouse? That's my recommendation. Are you going to choose the person who is a little bit of this and a little bit of that? Or are you going to choose the person that's the complete opposite of all the things you hated about your parents? How are you going to make this kind of decision, and how are you going to love? Now, the context of what's going on for Paul and for these early Christians is they think figuring out love is way too hard, that the world's going to end, that Jesus is going to come back, and you get to go to God. So don't mess with this crappy, difficult struggle of figuring out who to love and how to do it best, because it's too messy, and you're more likely to screw it up than to get it right. And if you're just going to go to heaven right away, wouldn't you rather just be celibate for a little while and not have to answer any questions about the choices you make in love? That's kind of what Paul's up to. And so it gets kind of a weird thing, and it's always counterbalanced by the fact that God loves us better than we know how to love each other and how we know how to live out romantic relationships. There's also different kinds of choice during this time period, which could be good or could be bad. It might be that your parents are choosing the person that you're getting married to. It might be that a work contract is choosing the person that you're married to. If you're a woman, you're probably not choosing at all. You're just kind of a part of the process. And during this time, if you chose not to marry someone that was appointed to you in any of those spheres, you could be burned at the stake, like Thecla and some of the other early Christian folk. And so it's a complicated time of thinking about marriage. It's also hysterical that though we have evolved in our thinking about love and in our thinking about choices, that doesn't mean that we have done much better, right? And partly that's because we might be more willing to turn and look at the snake and admit when we're in a situation of domestic violence or when there's addiction issues, and there might be a greater ease of being able to disconnect from those relationships, although regardless of if divorce is more possible, it's still certainly, anyone who's been divorced will tell you, full of consequences, whether it's financial consequences in bankruptcy, or it's social consequences, or just the pain and stupidity that happens between people who used to love each other and are going through this weird legal mess. So it's a very weird, complicated thing, and yet the popularity of Married at First Sight, a show where experts pair you with someone, and you make it work or you don't over the next year of your life, happens because people wonder if we just suck at choosing, if we make bad choices. And I don't know. I'm an avid watcher of the show. 2 of the 3 couples made it. Who knows how long they'll make it? But I don't know if you guys are interested in answering this question, but it's such a weird thing to be a pastor who stands there at weddings and or is trying to help give people guidance about when they're choosing to be married. And there's a requirement, at least in the Lutheran Church and the Episcopal Church, that couples have marriage counseling prior to their getting married, kind of with the idea that they get approved, or not. Maybe not. It just depends on how you do the marriage counseling. And also a weird thing to do if the people have been together longer than the pastor doing the marriage counseling has been with their partner. So it's a weird, super complicated thing. And to boot, Lutherans believe that who gets married is not something that's up to the church. It's something that politicians get to decide. At least that's what Luther used to say to get out of sticky wicket questions. Like, can you get married to more than one person or not, which he did once at least. And so now that marriage laws are changing, it's kind of astounding that we would have a different understanding other than that politics would define what a marriage is, and pastors are just bringing the God part. So it's a very sticky wicket, this whole love, lust, passions of the flesh business. The end. I don't know. What do you think, Amanda?
Love the microphone drop there. Thanks for that.
I like to do that. Speaking of passions of the flesh, what do you think, Amanda?
I think that we should ask John how he's going to address this with the confirmands, who are seriously wrestling with.
It does sound like a good time for a sex talk at confirmation camp that you would get really in trouble for.
Well, might get in trouble or might not, but I mean, it's who wrestles. I mean, we wrestle with this when we are desperately trying to figure out if we're going to get married to someone, but we also wrestle with this. I mean, teenagers wrestle mightily with this. So.
Huh. Hormones.
Hormones. John, any thoughts?
I mean, maybe it's just because I don't watch television, but it strikes me that there's it's impossible to escape, either in Paul's context or in our own, the presence of imperial sexuality. Sex that is connected not to love, not to relationality, not to mutuality, but to systems of power, dynamics having to do with creating honor or creating shame, dynamics that have to do with creating spiritual power. I mean, temple prostitution is a reality in the Mediterranean basin at this time. And even the idea that you could somehow find your soulmate on a game show strikes me as so absurdly stupid, but not just stupid, but imperial, right? It's a form of consumer choice / conquest, right? And so it's so ingrained in that, in what I view as oftentimes the unhealthiest uses of sexuality, that I think that there is something to be said for restraint. There is something to be said for modesty, and even for really careful discernment around the use of human sexuality, and to at the very least be aware of what are the powers and structures and dynamics and privileges that someone might be taking with that. You know, I've done previous work. I've been a rape crisis counselor. I've done survivors groups and things like that. So I do tend to come at these questions with a very strong desire to protect people.
Mhm.
Uh, but I also just kind of, think that it's very easy for us who have been whacked upside the head with the scriptures over a point like this to then say, okay, well, I guess the option is just anything goes. But I don't think anything goes actually works or is healthy or keeps people safe. So somewhere in there, there's a happy space between God-given sexuality and imperial uses of sexuality.
That sounds kind of Lutheran. I don't know about that. There's a report that just was released by the President's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Solutions, where they spent a year studying slavery in the United States, and particularly most of that slavery being sexual slavery. I'll put a link down here for those who are interested in reading that. It has the bishops of most of the major religions in the United States weighing in on that, and an interesting read if you're interested in learning more about some of the ways that sexuality and imperialism kind of still exists in the world in a really obvious way. Um, yeah. Amanda, you got anything else you want to add?
Um, I'll. I think the one piece about marriages and marriage counseling and those kinds of pieces that are hard to do as clergy and as young clergy, because I don't think that any of us are in our 60s and have been married for decades upon decades as of yet. So I think that I find it difficult, and also having been married and divorced, I find it difficult to judge other people's choices when they come to me to do marriage counseling to prepare for marriage. So I find it really interesting the method that I'm trained in. There was almost in the room during the training, there was almost this feeling of like, if you talk people out of getting married, you've done your job.
Oh,
Way to
goodness.
go. Because 50% of marriages are going to fail, and it's even higher if they're second marriages. So if you talk 50% of people out of getting married, then you've done your job and saved them from getting divorced. And I mean, that wasn't the exact, like, it was just like the things that were being celebrated were the number of people that had been talked out of getting married after having gone through this premarital thing. And I still use the tool. I still find it a helpful tool. But personally, when couples come to me, I just think that in our current society and how things are right now, um, instead of it being kind of like what Paul is saying, like, look, the world is going to end. Don't do it right now. Just don't bother right now. Everyone is kind of in this space of, well, everybody should get married. And so people are getting married who may or may not be ready for it. And once your invitations are out, and once kids have sent out their save the dates, the bridal industry in this country is so high and strong and is such a beast to reckon with. And there's such pride and there's such expectation locked up in it that I don't think that it is helpful as a pastor to try to talk a couple out of a wedding who have already sent out invitations and done a save the date, and now they're finally finding the pastor to be able to officiate at the service. And they're 2 years into their planning, or they're over halfway into their planning, depending on how long they've given themselves to plan. And now you're coming in and making them doubt their relationship. I don't know that that is actually helpful. I think that it's helpful to have the conversation about, here are some areas where you might experience some tension and you might have some difficulties, and thank you so much for coming and talking to me, and let's continue to have coffee together. Because when the shit hits the fan, not if, because in marriage it's a when those things happen, hopefully you've had the opportunity to create a safe space so that this couple comes back or finds a counselor to help them through the situation, because they've had an experience of working with a third person about their relationship in a safe and mutually upbuilding kind of a manner. And so my my piece with the idea of marital counseling and church's approval or disapproval of weddings, and people who say, I've refused to do weddings because their marriage just wasn't going to last. My response to that is I do any wedding that I'm invited to do that I can do because I want God to be a part of that wedding,
Mm-hmm.
and I want a relationship to be established between myself and this couple so that they have somewhere to go. Because I know marriage is really, really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that divorce sucks no matter what. It just sucks. Even if it's mutually amicable and all of that pretty flowers and butterfly kind of version of divorce, it still sucks. People still walk away hurting, and people still want the presence of God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would rather build relationship with folks, and hope that they know that they can come back and talk than to turn people away and say, well, your marriage is probably going to end soon. The world is probably going to end soon. So why don't you just abstain for a little while? Because I just don't know that that's a sustainable way to live in our world long term.
Yeah.
So there's my take on that.
I once played Fools Rush In at a wedding that I knew wasn't going to last very long. It happened to be a Vegas wedding, and I was able to put on Elvis sideburns and play Fools Rush In. And because it's true, Fools Rush In. But I agree with Pastor Amanda. I think knowing that God can show up even when you're making a bad decision is more powerful than, being the one to say, hey, this isn't going to work. Because people do tend to shoot the messenger. And I know, at least in my life, that when I had the experience of telling my sister I thought she was going to marry someone who was going to be abusive to her. And that meant that I got to not talk to my sister ever again, even after it was proved to be true. And she got divorced. And so it's just a very difficult thing trying to figure out when you say something and when you don't say something. Just as hard as a parent as it is as the pastor in the situation. It also can be difficult because saying no as a pastor, as a faith community, can do a lot of religious damage and feel like it is inflicting the kinds of abuse that different faiths have done. And so I don't know if we're in a place where we can have that kind of hard no. That's all.
I've had the good fortune of being able to do some 50th and 60th anniversary wedding rituals. And I've oftentimes in preparing for those things, because it's just a renewal, right? So we're going to say a few prayers, and they're gonna still be in love. I've taken the opportunity during those sessions to prepare for those things, to kind of put on my sociology hat and interview the couple and be like, all right, 60 years, how'd you do it? And I'd say some of the very best stuff that I've ever shared with couples I've been working with in wedding preparation has come from not me or not any resource I've read or any journal article, but from talking to people who've made it for 4, 5, 6 decades. And what's really funny is that when it gets that long out, you start seeing a lot of times early Christians began to say, well, marriage is kind of this mirror of how God loves us. And we all know that most of the time it's not. Most of the time in our marriages that it's an example of how humans don't love each other very well. But as it really starts to stretch out in time, I start to hear messages that for me really reflect the love of God in those relationships. People saying things like, the secret to our success is fuzzy memory. And what do you mean? Well, I don't really remember all the crap he's done, so we just kind of keep rolling. Or people saying things like, well, you can't keep score because the only reason to keep score is to figure out who won when it's over, right? And it's like just this really awesome wisdom that I've gotten from these couples that have gone a long way. So I think that if God is in it and there's an opportunity for there to be some real genuine growth, human relationships can come to reflect some godlike qualities or some of that really unconditional love, but there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee. There's no promise, and there's not even really a magic formula for how that shows up. I think it just kind of, in a gracious fashion, shows up. Which I think is, I mean, kind of looping all the way back to the text. At the very bottom of the text, we have this thing like, good news. You figuring this out is not what makes God love you.
Yeah, thank God. Well, and it's funny, too, because also a lot of the couples who have made it for a really long time, or at least the ones that I know, are the ones that started in ways that you never would have expected or possibly approved, right? My grandma picked my grandpa because he was the only guy her age with a car, right? My great-grandparents got together because they got pregnant, and that's not how you're supposed to start your committed time together, and they made it last for their whole lives long. Excuse me. So you never know. Some of them work because you've got all your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and some of them don't, and sometimes the kids keep you together, and what the heck are kids for if not to keep you together? So I don't know why you're laughing, Amanda. No. John, we got to go to John because it's a good one. It's the one you hold up in football signs, right?
Oh.
John 3:15.
16.
Oh, no. It's not so that everyone gets eternal life? Yeah. If you're gonna read John 3:16 or you've been hurt by it, remember to read John 3:17, that it's not Jesus coming to the world to judge the world like the judgy people who hold up the sign at football games. Oh wait, I said that. But that everyone can be saved. The next verses after that talk about how if you believe, you get the pie. So if you believe, you're in. And if you ignore the baggage that we have about the verses that come after that, the ones that say that if you ever do a single evil thing ever once in your life, then God must not love you and you must love darkness. Forget the text where John expects us to be perfect and just go back and read 16 through 18 again, and then you'll feel better. That's how I feel about that. John, what do you think?
Sorry, I jumped in because I also have a hard time with this text just because as someone who grew up non-Christian, and this is one of those texts where it really, all of my, like, I don't want to be hit upside the head with Bible verses, all of that kind of part of me, the hackles raise on the back of my neck, and I just like, with the stupid signs. So I have a very hard time with this, even though I believe this does have within it the light shines in the darkness and the darkness will not overcome it, which is one of my favorite verses of all time. Like the ring that I wear on my right hand is for that passage to remind me that and has to do with my divorce we've talked about, that even in the darkest of times the light still shines. I wear that every single day so that I can remember that promise that God has made. So it has a really powerful verse in there for me as well. And I really don't like having people hit upside the head with the Bible. It makes it feel like a weapon rather than a gift, and I have a hard time with that. So last week in the Bible Basics class, as I was teaching, talked a bit about, what is the Bible to you? And to many people, it is just a beautiful thing that is gorgeous and has a lot of words of hope and life. And then there are others of us for whom, in younger years or as people have continued to grow, it has been used as a weapon and as a device of harm and abuse. So the book is beautiful and terrible and a gift and something that has been used to harm. So it's all of those things all in one big foul swoop. And the cool thing is that God is all in the midst of that in trying to fix things and do things with it. But I get like, this verse, like I have to read this out loud on Sunday in front of everybody, and I'm just gonna kind of cringe when I'm doing the reading, in some ways, because I I don't know that people hear anything before it or much after it, because I think we hear, "For God so loved the world," and everyone is like at a football game and watching signs in the end zone instead of being present in the room on Sunday morning. So that's my babbles of mild resentment, and I don't want to read it on Sunday, and I don't know what I'm going to preach. So there's my wine. John, your turn.
So, well, kind of two thoughts. Uh, One is that I really wish that the evangelist had time to come back to these writings and think about them when he'd had a little bit more time to heal. I think it's always really important when we're reading text put down by survivors who are in the midst of transition, right? This is someone we have a pretty good sense that he or people close to him experienced being ejected from their worshiping community for what they were talking about and what they believed to be true in their own lives. And if you've never been ejected from a church, it's almost impossible to understand the deep spiritual wounding that's present in the text. And so just like we might kind of want to bash people with signs at football games, perhaps the evangelist wants to do a little bashing of his own as part of understanding what Jesus means to him and what he experienced at the hands of people who weren't there with him, who weren't in the same place as he was theologically. That being said, we had a lot of fun in the Bible study this week, going back into the Greek and realizing, God so loved the cosmos. And I mean, we got off on this crazy discussion about exoplanets that we'd heard on NPR. And then a lot of people here live in towns with little to no light pollution. And so talked about sitting on the mountaintop, watching the night sky roll over. And then to think about a God who loves on a scale that big really then starts to overwhelm the light and darkness images in the text, because you look out in the night sky, right? It's mostly darkness and points of light, and yet God loves it all. Every creature, every atom, every speck, the dark matter that pushes galaxies apart. It's sometimes you can redeem a cosmic text like this by going big instead of going small. The challenge, I think, then is that the average listener in the pew is listening small, unless you help them get somewhere else.
That is better. I like that better. Winner. I don't know if we're allowed to declare biblical winners, but I just did.
Ta-da. There was a video, I don't even know, it was just on my newsfeed, and I was doing something else, and it started auto-playing in my Facebook feed that had like the different sizes of everything that we know in our known universe, and like showed the perspective of like, so this is the size of the moon, and then this is the size of the next, and the size of the next, and the size of the next, and it goes up through like all the different stars. It's like the ginormous biggest star that we know how big it is, and then it like put that in perspective with the Earth, which is this little speck, and compared to the size of this giant star, that it's like, and then not only is that the case, but this is a star in one universe, and there's this many universes in this part of the galaxy, and like all this, and the end of it was, you are not the center of the universe, was what came up at the very end of it. But it's just the perspective part of it before it got to the snarky, like, get over yourself kind of a message that was going on at the end of the video. The perspective part of it was actually kind of cool and could be useful for this idea of like, if you had a video to kind of show God and the cosmos and the vastness of that if I can find it, I will find it, and we can link it down here. I'll see if I can find it. But it's totally like, at the end, it's just snark to just tell someone to shut up, that they're not the center of the universe. So that is not the intention of, if we post it down here, that would not be the intention. The intention would be to say that if you can cut it before the snark comes, that it would be a useful video.
You're still not the center of the universe.
No, really not. But yeah.
Sometimes a thing is true and not helpful at the same time.
Yeah. That's very true. And if you're interested in reading Lutheran ponderings about if God loves us the best, even if we discover aliens someday, you can read some of Ted Peters' writings, but I don't recommend them.
Okay.
That's just me. Just in case you want to think about those things, right? Because now they're saying life on Mars was inevitable because of the amount of water, blah, blah, blah. Just saying, there are NASA geeks out there.
Right.
And there are also a lot of people who find ethics and metaphors for how to love God from Skyhawk and from all kinds of different sci-fi. Sometimes sci-fi movies do a better job talking about ethics in the ways that the world can be or what God is up to than dating reality shows. I think that's what we've maybe learned today.
That's possible.
I don't know. That's what I thought. Anyone else got any thoughts about the text today? I think we made it through all of them.
I just think the other fun. I love puns, and so I love the fact that we kind of throw away that verse 14 and 15 because it comes before 3:16.
Yeah.
But it has the whole thing about lifting up, and I love that verb is like it's simultaneously like celebrating and the kind of thing that would happen to a person like when say they were installed as a bishop or inaugurated as a president, and just like literally going up, like running shorts up a flagpole. Very, apropos for camp. So, so when Jesus uses the word that, must be lifted up, it's all three of those things going on at the same time, which is really interesting.
I like that. So believe in Jesus because it might make good things happen.
Or when you see Jesus hung out to dry, it possibly means that something good is happening.
Yes, exactly. Or when you see Jesus' shorts on the flagpole? What?
I'm not going there.
I don't know. The Shroud of Turin's getting some back in the news again, so.
There you go.
I was going to say, I don't think he wore shorts, though, right? He had the cloth that was all in one piece.
Right.
I don't understand how that works. I don't know.
I'm still searching for the planets, but I'm not finding it. I don't even know whose feet it was on. So, folks, if it's not there and you actually want to see it, I'm sorry.
Google the planets. You'll find something interesting to look at.
Yeah.
Don't Google snakes.
No.
And Christianity, because...
Apparently, Jonathan Redmond and Alex Horsey, who play some really awesome characters on Doctor Who, it's their birthday today, so that's what my newsfeed is filled with, is celebrating Doctor Who actors' birthdays. Just saying.
Who? Just kidding. It was a pun for Jen.
I caught the pun.
All right. Well, we seem to be winding out of steam, as is easy to do to a pastor in Lent.
Yes.
So, thank you everyone for stopping by. We'll see you next week. We'll talk more Bible. It'll be great. Laters.